Salutations. Now, is that really the best lighting we could have? That's slightly better, if you can tell. Well, an interesting enough day today. I received my silver membership certificate for Justice for Men and Boys, which is to pay £10 a month. Altruistic boast for something I believe in, to help men's issues, to rail against political correctness as much as possible, particularly to stick up for males, for to make, as Paul Elam said, people care enough about saving males as saving whales, at least. And so you can see it's a bit of a minimal rustic affair. They really went to town on that. He even sent it in a plastic wallet. Should he have capital letters for some of these things? Well, it's hard to know. Party leader signature, Mike Buchanan. Good on him. Good ex-public school boy, whatever they are. With a name like Michael, not surprisingly a Catholic school. His book with the horrendous picture on the front. So hammer home the point, hammer home the message. Understandable. It seems a very good book. I've also read, as I've explained, I've read the manifesto for 2015. And 4 more bands to give to all my friends. So what am I going to do with them? I don't know. No point leaving them in the library these days, there's only one library in town. The original one from the Men's Issues Conference at the EXO London, a building which you could fit a small town into, but we only use one room for 200 people. I'm not bitching, I'm just saying, it's we had people from all over the world, and I was there, but I'm glad I was there. And I would like to be a parliamentary candidate, a member of parliament, but the likelihood of doing it, who knows? We could be the kingmakers, we're the dream makers. And in 2020, by that time, I've worked out I'll probably have paid about £440, which isn't far off paying my own deposit, but apparently all the 20 deposits are already paid. But as somebody said to me, it might not work. I mean, it does seem a slightly almost Asperger syndrome mentality to only have 20, something I'm quite familiar with, believe it or not. And MRAs are considered to be a bit more on the autistic spectrum for some reason, I think. But alright, I could have another theory about that, that it's to do with developmental trauma disorders, complex post-traumatic disorder, stress disorder. But the people who want to help something find it hardest to help themselves often, and they tend to have a higher IQ and doubt themselves. Come up against all sorts of bullies of one form or another. But what an intelligent and proactive bunch, as I intend to be myself. Not a bunch, but yeah, individual. 20 constituencies. I've looked some of them up. I think some of them are in the north of England, not that far away from me, in Lancashire. Some of them are there's one in Truro, Cornwall. There's one in Abingdon. I've got relatives in Abingdon, so I think I'll stay away from there if possible. Because that's another thing. I don't just want to wed the anti-social justice warrior in my own life. It would be nice to to fight against the cluster B personality disorder problem that we have in the world. If I can just jump on that bandwagon and lift from people who seem better informed than me, although I'm still trying to get informed, I wonder if I don't get to stand for J4MB, it might be worth standing for an independent, or it might even be worth trying to start a small party of my own, or at least name my independence movement. My independent movement, something like, I don't know, Character Plus, because we're talking about character disturbed and the non-character disturbed in society, what effect this has and everything. As I say, cluster B personality disorders, and character disturbance is a term used more by George Simon. He's a psychiatrist or psychologist at least, and I noticed other people don't tend to use those words as much. The main people whose ideas I lift, I take in the information, have so far been Richard Grannon, a little bit of Sam Vaknin, George Simon, as I say, Jackson Mackenzie. I'm trying to swat up on people who say you can raise children better, such as it's Dr. Thomas Gordon. Or is it Gordon Thomas? Thomas Gordon. Parental effectiveness training. I've got another book on my phone by Selma Freyberg, one or two others. One written just in 2015 about the eccentricities of parents who have Asperger's as opposed to the children having Asperger's, which is quite possible, particularly if you live somewhere like Silicon Valley, or maybe in this country the M4 corridor, where you've got parents who work in IT, perhaps, or something like that, where there's usually a higher percentage of people on the autistic spectrum. That's a very left-brained sort of autism. My parents don't work in those areas. My parents work in the state sector for allied health professions. So if you're wondering about it being in the genes, interestingly, people who work in those areas tend to have a higher rate of, or a higher incidence of narcissistic traits, narcissistic personality disorder, possibly full-blown, possibly not. Or one narcissistic parent will marry somebody, usually the male who has the dad who has the narcissistic traits. I could go into a little bit more with one of the other books I've read by Tony Attwood about Asperger syndrome, The Complete Guide to Asperger Syndrome, which is a bit laughable if you think about it. Something that's not even in the advanced or later days of research called A Complete Guide to something. It's almost like that is a very black and white way of writing a book. Like you try to have a gist about something, and maybe he's not as autistic as all that. Maybe he's more a bit of a wide boy, a bit of an opportunist, a bit narcissistic. People get away with things when they can get away with them. People who are successful. But he's informative and he seems reasonable and nice. But if people look nice, they must be nice. And not really. Consider myself more right-brained. This is a good book, I think. It even has physical exercises relating body and mind, suggestions to link the brain. And this is a book, Dr. Rob Milello, about autism. It does mention trauma, but it doesn't mention developmental trauma disorders, cluster B disorders, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. That's the autism industry. This is Bessel van der Kolk, who is a specialist in developmental trauma disorders. Another very good book. Interestingly, also links body and mind, saying the benefits of yoga and Tai Chi are particularly well, what's the word I'm looking for? The effective in people with some quite terrible, rough backgrounds, or more obviously so. Although, what is not a terrible, an obvious, terrible, rough background? Because emotional abuse, as certain people have said, can actually be more severe than sexual and physical. The people who've had those types of abuse consider it to be so. I mean, there are more subtle forms of both types of abuse, or lesser, which still have an effect. Like maybe you weren't beaten up for most of your life as a minor, but there was some physical punishment. Sexual abuse, maybe you weren't more obviously molested, although you don't remember the first 5 years of your life, but there may have been certain sexual boundaries that were crossed, such as maybe you saw nudity, or were touched in the wrong way at some point, or people make sexually suggestive things, or you hear people having sex, or you see them having sex. Why does this feel like therapy? Anyway, another good book, as I say, by Bessel van der Kolk. Two of the most interesting therapies that I've not tried. Therapy isn't really something I tried. I did when I had depression earlier in life, when I was about 20. I supposedly had depression. I had to have depression because my dad said I had depression. Now, my dad is a community psychiatric nurse, or retired, so he knows all about what causes depression, doesn't he? Eye movement desensitization reprocessing, EMDR. Funny thing, you don't seem to need to have to talk very much about your problems to the person doing it. It's almost like, do they need to be a psychiatrist even? I don't know. There's even something on YouTube which I think something just moves across the screen because it simulates somebody moving their finger in front of your face, which somehow, just how it ended, re-traumatises you, puts you when you remember things, and helps you to process the problem. Believe it or not, maybe skeptical. So something called feedback, like when they put electrodes on your head, or something that changes something in the signals in the brain. Do you mean mind control by machine? If only the Terminator had thought of that. So another thing I got was this. Actually, something I think delivered. Where was the first constituency, or the Ashfield constituency? Is that in Nottingham? There was one in the Nottingham area. I think 3 constituencies in 2015 were contested by Justice for Men and Boys and the Women Who Love Them Party. And amongst the things they care about are, this is abortion that's up there. That's more to do with whose right is it to abort a child. Fetal alcohol syndrome, to be honest, I'm not the most well up on that. There's genital mutilation, that's circumcision, worse than you think. It's illegal and it still happens. It's illegal and no one cares that it happens. Well, why would they? Because it's just circumcision. Well, think about it again. Come back to that. Whereas if it was a woman's private parts that were being snipped at, and they used to do more things like that even in the Western world, or burn away their clitoris and things like that. In Kellogg's, I believe, it was an anti-masturbation campaigner. Various thoughts that if you ate cereal it would make you less lusty and have less than if you had sausages and bacon. Well, we would not want anybody to have lust now, would we? Where would we be? Unborn, perhaps? Reduced to test tube babies. Goodbye, son, try to be a good lad. I do think families are a lot more stable, even though I've fallen out with my mum and dad. And even look at my mother's parents and my father's parents and see them as there being some considerable dysfunctions and generational traumas. That's some of the main problems we now have are a lack of gainful employment for men, lack of help for boys, lack of decent primary caregiver, or emphasis on a primary caregiver for a child. Like, why should a mother regard having their child, raising their child, as a career option? Now, that may sound very reactionary, but it isn't reactionary if you read psychology and you want to reduce trauma and you want to reduce the problems people have, and you want to have a good relationship with your family members, and you want to be cooperative, and you want them to be free, to be fulfilled at the same time as being, well, not your friends, but friendly. So you see, these two things combine, the psychology of cluster B personality disorders and male rights and anti-political correctness and anti-social justice warrior and anti-Marxism. We come for you, as they say in Dune. Baron, Emperor, we come for you. They may come for us. One dark night. Take care, everyone.